Welcome to all. In today's video program, we are going to discuss about Robert Gagne's theory of learning and its implications for instructional design. In this video, we will discuss about Robert Gagne's theory of learning, which consists of three components. Then we will discuss about the three components in details, such as the taxonomy of learning outcomes, conditions of learning, and then 9 events of instruction. Also, we will discuss about the hierarchy of learning proposed by Robert Gagne. After watching this video, you should be able to develop understanding about Robert Gagne's learning theory. You will able to classify the three components of Gagne's theory of learning. You are able to analyze or examine the hierarchy of learning. You develop an understanding about the implications of Gagne's theory of learning. Let us discuss Gagne's theory in detail. Robert Gagne is considered to be one of the foremost contributors to the systemic approach to instructional design. His work has been particularly influential in training and the design of instructional materials. Gagne's model of instructional design is based on the information processing model of the mental events that occur when adults are presented with various stimuli and focuses on the learning outcomes and how to arrange specific instructional events to achieve those outcomes. Robert Mills Gagne, he was an American educational psychologist and best known for his conditions of learning. Gagne's work is sometimes summarized as the Gagne assumption. Gagne's theory stipulates that there are several types and levels of learning, and each of these types and levels requires instruction that is tailored to meet the needs of the learners. Gagne's theory is more properly classified as an instructional design theory rather than a learning theory. And when we think of this instructional design and learning theory, what is the difference between these two terms? A learning theory consists of a set of constructs and propositions that account for how changes in human performance abilities come about. What is this instructional theory? Instructional theory seeks to describe the conditions under which one can intentionally arrange for the learning of the specific performance outcomes. When we look at Robert Gagne's theory, the concept map that is displayed on the screen, it shows that Gagne's theory of instruction, it was developed by the propounder Robert Mills Gagne, and this theory consists of three components. What are the three components? The three components are a taxonomy of learning outcomes, conditions of learning, 9 events of instruction. When we look at the taxonomy of learning outcomes, there we can divide the learning outcomes. Normally in a classroom, the learning outcomes can be categorized into 3 domains. When a learner learns something, or we can say that when the teachers instruct something, the learning outcomes is happening at the 3 domains. Number 1, cognitive domain. Number 2, affective domain, and number 3, psychomotor domain. So what is happening in the cognitive domain? At the cognitive domain, we can see that the learning outcomes can be categorized as verbal information, intellectual skills, and cognitive strategies. So there are 3 learning outcomes that are happening at the cognitive domain. Coming to the affective domain, we can term it as attitudes. And coming to the psychomotor domain, we will term the learning outcome as the motor skills, what is coming. This is the taxonomy of learning outcomes that is happening at the 3 domains. Next concept in Gagne's theory of instruction, that is conditions of learning. When we think of the conditions of learning, we can say that it can be divided into 2, internal condition and external condition. So what is this internal condition means? When learning takes place, the learner should have some skills and capabilities on his or her own. Based on that, his or her internal condition prepares that person for learning process. Coming to the external condition, that is a teacher or a tutor in the distance education, how he or she prepares the learner for the learning process. What are the stimuli that the teacher provides to the learner? That comes as the external condition. Then comes the 9 events of instruction. So before coming to the 9 events of instruction, we can see once again what are the outcomes of Gagne's. The outcomes means the learning outcomes of Gagne's theory. There we can see that the learning outcomes are verbal information. So here, verbally telling about the definition of a concept, that is the verbal information. Then the intellectual skills, that some kind of task doing that is needed to solve a problem. That is the example for these intellectual skills. Then the cognitive strategies, that where it needs the thinking process is coming there. Then the attitudes. So after teaching a lesson on nationalism, what type of attitude the learner develops, that is coming under the attitudes. Then comes the motor skills, how the learner is able to display the thing that is presented to him or her. So this is all about Gagne's outcome strategies. Then now let me discuss the third component in Gagne's theory of instruction, that is 9 events of instruction. In that, let us first classify what are the 9 events of instruction. In that we can see gaining attention, informing learners of the objective, stimulating recall of prerequisite learning, presenting the stimulus material, providing learning guidance, eliciting the performance, providing feedback, assessing performance, enhancing retention and transfer. So these are the 9 events of instruction. When we discuss about these 9 events of instruction, let us elaborate in detail what does it mean in the learning process. So the first one, we take it as gaining attention. What is the duty of a teacher? Whether it is a distance teacher or a face-to-face teacher, the teacher first has to attract the attention of the learners. For this purpose, the teacher may use different stimulus, different ways or different strategies to invite or to gain the attention of the learners. Number 2, that is informing learners of the objective. You know very well that when we teach a lesson, there is predetermined objectives. So now, instead of objectives, we term it as learning outcomes. But regarding the objectives, what is there is that there should be some kind of objectives that the learner should achieve after the process of instruction. For example, for today's session, my objective is that the learner should be able to develop understanding about Gagne's theory of instruction. So this type of objectives should be informed to the learners. Then comes stimulating recall of prerequisite learning. This is the main thing that we do whether we teach in a class or in a self-learning material. In the introductory part, you can see that we are trying to recall what the learner already knows. There comes the importance of testing the existing knowledge of the learner. We may call it as the previous knowledge or the prerequisite understanding of the learners. Then comes the point, that is the fourth point, presenting the stimulus material. So how do we present the material? What type of stimulus we are giving to the learners to achieve the content? Then comes the sixth point, providing learning guidance. There what is important is that there the teacher has to provide the guidance to the learner that what are the difficulties or how to perform a task in a better way. That type of guidance should be given to the learners. So we have discussed so far 5 events of instruction. Then comes the 6th event, that is eliciting the performance. So when we are teaching, it is not a one-way traffic. There it needs the learning experiences of the learner. For the learning experiences, what we have to give some kind of task or performance to the learners. Then comes the 7th event of instruction, that is providing feedback, which is as important as other events of instruction. So here the teacher, whether it is a distance teacher or a face-to-face teacher, we have to provide feedback to the learners. Then comes the 8th event of instruction, that is assessing performance. Just giving tasks to the learners is not enough. The teacher has to know whether the learner is able to achieve the objective. For that, we have to assess the performance of the learner. Then comes the 9th event of instruction, that is enhancing retention and transfer. What is this? The term retention means? The term retention denotes that the learner should be able to retain the learned facts in his or her mind. And transfer means that when a new situation comes, the learner should develop the ability to apply the learned task. So, this is the holistic concept map of Gagne's theory of instruction. So far, we have seen the holistic concept map of Gagne's theory of instruction. And next, we are going to discuss about the hierarchy of learning put forward by Gagne. And in this hierarchy, we can see that there are 8 steps of hierarchy of learning. Let us recall what are these hierarchy of learning. Let me go to the bottom. We can see that the signal learning, next one stimulus response learning, next chaining, next verbal association, next discrimination learning, next concept learning, next rule learning, and the last one, that is the problem solving. So when we go through this, before entering into the detailed explanation of each hierarchy of learning, when we look at the pyramid of this hierarchy of learning, what we can see is that the lower 4 points or the lower 4 steps, that is signal learning, stimulus response learning, chaining and verbal association. They are lower level of thinking is taking place or lower order of thinking. And when it comes to discrimination learning, concept learning, rule learning and problem solving, there we can see that the learning is going at a higher level. So the higher order of thinking is necessary in the hierarchy of learning. So we can see that this hierarchy of learning is very important in getting or attaining any task. So what is happening is here that in a classroom, that is normally, or in the self-learning material according to the age appropriate of the learners or according to the needs of the learners, we have to start from the lower level. Let us discuss each point in detail. First one, that is signal learning. This is the simplest form of learning and it consists essentially of the classical conditioning which was first described by the psychologist Pavlov. So we know that Pavlov's theory, it is termed as classical conditioning. And in this type of learning, the individual acquires a conditioned response to a given signal. So here, what is important is that a stimulus is needed and then the response is also will be there. So what is happening here, when we think of examples of this signal learning, we can say that what is happening in the daily life. When we are traveling or driving a car, when a driver sees a red signal, he will stop his car. This is known as signal learning. So this is an example. So in the daily life, we are knowingly or unknowingly going through the process of signal learning. Coming to the second point, that is stimulus response learning. This is otherwise known as operant conditioning, which was developed by Skinner. So this operant conditioning, that theory was developed by Skinner, and in this the main concept is stimulus response. Stimulus response learning is all about getting a response to a stimuli. In a classroom, suppose a teacher says that raise your hands to the students will raise their hands. So this is the stimulus response learning that is taking place. Or otherwise, in an online platform, the teacher asks the students to unmute and give the response. The students unmute and response to the queries. This is known as the stimulus response learning. The next hierarchy of learning, that is chaining. This type of learning is the ability to connect two or more previously learned stimulus response bonds into a linked sequence. So what is happening here? We can see that there is a stimulus response linkage between. So when we want to learn a particular task which contains a lot of process, we used this chaining. It is the process whereby most complex psychomotor skills are learned. And in this type of learning, the person links together previously learned stimulus response. So what is happening? Take the case of riding a cycle. How a person learned to ride a bicycle. So there are different processes. So when we combine together the different processes, that is known as chaining. Then comes verbal association. What does this mean? Verbal association. This is a form of chaining in which the links between the items being connected are verbal in nature. Verbal association is one of the key processes in the development of language skills. So in the language class, the general type of the hierarchy of learning that is taking place is verbal association. This learning is a type of chaining, but the links are verbal units. Showing a ball to the child will state that it is a ball. This is an example for verbal association. Next, fifth hierarchy of learning is discrimination learning. This involves developing the ability to make appropriate responses to a series of similar stimuli that differ in a systematic way. So here we can see that there may be same kind or categories of stimulus, but when the child is able to discriminate between the items, that is known as discrimination learning. For example, on the road we can see several types of cars are going on. When a person is able to name that car belongs to Maruti or that car belongs to another category, here develops the discrimination learning. Or otherwise, when a ball is given to the child is able to name the object that it is a ball. That level we will term it as verbal association. But when the child is able to tell that it is a round ball, it is blue in color and it is rolling. So in this way, when the child is able to discriminate the ball in different ways, or we can say that there is a series of similar stimuli that differ in a systematic way. So here the next hierarchy of learning, that is concept learning. Here we know that the term itself denotes what is the emphasis of this type of learning the concept. This involves developing the ability to make a consistent response to different stimuli that form a common class or category of some sort. It forms the basis of the ability to generalize, classify, etc. In learning a concept, we respond to stimuli in terms of abstract characteristics like color, shape, position, and number. So here we have to learn that how we define a mountain. So there it comes the concept learning. What are the terms that we are going to use there? Or how do we define the types of or the classification of rocks, igneous rocks, metamorphic rocks, sedimentary rocks. So here different types of concepts are developing. Then comes the rule learning. What is happening here is that this is a very high level cognitive process that involves being able to learn relationships between concepts and apply these relationships in different situations, including situations not previously encountered. In learning a rule, we relate to or more concepts. Rules are chains of concepts. We may represent knowledge as a hierarchy of rules in which we must learn 2 or more rules before learning a higher order rule which embraces them. So when a learner is going to solve a mathematical problem, there occurring is rule learning. And the last hierarchy of learning is problem solving. This is the highest level of cognitive process according to Gagne. It involves developing the ability to invent a complex rule or a procedure for the purpose of solving one particular problem and then using the method to solve other problems of a similar nature. So when the learner is able to solve a problem by adopting different processes and strategies, that becomes an example of problem solving. So next we are going to discuss about the implication of Gagne's theory on instructional design. So in this, especially in distance learning, what are the implications of Gagne's theory on instructional design? We have seen that it is more than a learning theory, it is more similar to the instructional design. The design of instruction should involve analyzing requirements, selecting media, and designing the instructional events. The skills should be learned one at a time, and each new skill learned should build on previously acquired skills. We cannot give new skills every time. It should build upon from the previous learned skill. The analysis phase must identify and describe the prerequisite lower level skills and knowledge required for an instructional objective. Lower level objectives must be mastered before higher level ones. Objectives must be stipulated in concrete behavioral terms. Positive reinforcement should be used in a repetitive manner.